There is human truth about narcissistas que Jordan Peterson considero so fundamental to human psychology que he calls it the iron law of narcissistic collapse. Every narcissista, no matter how successful, how manipulative, or how psychologically sophisticated, will eventually face a moment of complete breakdown, a brutal self-recognition. É not uma possibility, é uma psychological inevitability. Peterson, através decades of clinical observation e deep understanding of personality structure, descobriu que the very mechanisms que protect narcissistas from reality for years or decades eventually become the instruments of their own psychological destruction. O que ele revealed about this inevitable process vai choque você about the inescapable nature of psychological truth in the devastating price of living uma life built entirely on lies. If you want to understand what's really going on inside a narcissist's mind when the mask falls, subscribe to the channel, like it, and comment below if you already suspected that one day this collapse would happen. The inevitability of a narcissistic breakdown is not based on moral justice or karma. It is based on psychological mechanics that are as predictable as physical laws. Peterson discovered that narcissists create what he calls reality debt, an accumulating psychological burden that grows with every denial, every rationalization, every act of blame shifting they use to maintain their grandiose self-image. Like financial debt, who compounds with interest over time, reality debt becomes increasingly difficult to service. Each new act of manipulation requires more elaborate justifications. Each relationship destroyed requires more sophisticated blame shifting. Each failure requires more creative reframing. Eventually, the psychological energy required to maintain these defenses becomes unsustainable. Imagine for a moment trying to juggle not just one U2 balls, but hundreds of balls simultaneously. Each ball representing uma li você told yourself. Uma person você manipulated. My responsibility você transferred to others. You can maintain this juggling act para uma while, maybe even para years, but the cognitive load eventually becomes overwhelming. E quando você start dropping balls, they don't fall one at uma time. They all come crashing down simultaneously. Mas você consegue imaginar what it feels like quando decades of carefully constructed psychological defenses suddenly fail all at once. According to recent studies in neuropsychology, the narcissistic brain experiences this collapse as uma form of psychological trauma, uma sudden, overwhelming confrontation com reality that the mind cannot process. Effectively, like someone who has been taking increasing doses of humor, painkiller para years, suddenly being forced to feel every injury. They've been masking simultaneously the pain, and not just current, accumulated. In the compound interest on decades of suppressed psychological truth finally coming due all at once. And then, the inevitable reckoning arrives. Peterson describes this moment as one of the most predictable yet devastating experiences in human psychology. Predictable porque it follows patterns that can be observed across cultures, across time periods, across different types of narcissistic presentation. Yet a devastating porque when it happens, the narcissista's entire sense of reality crumbles in a way that feels completely unexpected to them. The first stage of inevitable breakdown, que Peterson calls defense system overload, occurs quando the narcisista can no longer maintain their elaborate network of psychological protections. These defenses, blame shifting, gaslighting, projection, rationalization, worked effectively para years, mesmo decades. But they require constant maintenance, constant refinement, constant energy expenditure. Peterson explains that most narcissistas don't realize how much psychological energy they expend daily just maintaining their defensive architecture. It's like running uma complex computer program in the background at all times. Eventually, even the most powerful system runs out of processing capacity. But is this breakdown truly inevitable? Or could a narcissist potentially maintain their defenses indefinitely? Peterson's research reveals something both fascinating and disturbing. While the breakdown is inevitable, the timing is highly variable. Some narcissists experience collapse in their 20s, others not until their 70s or 80s. The determining factors are not moral considerations, but practical psychological limitations. How many people have they manipulated? How elaborate have their justifications become? How many contradictions are they trying to maintain simultaneously? How much reality debt have they accumulated? Você consegue imaginar living with such a complex web of self-deception que simply keeping track of all your lies becomes a full-time psychological job? Peterson documented cases where narcissists developed elaborate internal filing systems just to maintain consistency in their various narratives about themselves. Deixe nos comentários se você ver. Noticed someone struggling to keep track of their own version of events porque they had created so many different stories. The second stage, que Peterson calls reality pressure buildup, involves the gradual accumulation of evidence that contradicts their self-narrative. Like cracks forming in uma dam, individually manageable but collectively catastrophic when they reach critical mass. Every failed relationship leaves residual evidence of their destructive patterns. Every professional setback creates documentation of their manipulative behavior. Every estranged family member represents testimony about their emotional abuse. Over time, this evidence becomes impossible to explain away through their usual defense. Mechanisms. Peterson discovered that narcissists in this stage often become increasingly frantic in their attempts to control information about themselves. They may become obsessed with their reputation, spend enormous energy managing their public image, who attempt to preemptively discredit anyone who might expose their behavior patterns. But these efforts only accelerate the inevitable breakdown. The more energy they expend trying to control external perceptions, the less energy they have available for maintaining their internal psychological defenses. É uma vicious cycle que leads inevitably to complete system failure. Mas o que happens in the moment of actual breakdown vai choque você profundamente. Peterson revealed que narcissistas experiencing inevitable breakdown often describe it as feeling like waking up from uma lifelong dream, except that the dream was their grandiose self-perception. The reality they wake up to and the devastation they've caused over decades. It's not a gradual dawning of awareness. É uma sudden, overwhelming confrontation com the complete truth about themselves and their impact on others. As seeing themselves clearly, but for the first time in years or decades. What they see is so contrary to their previous self-image that it creates immediate psychological crisis. E aqui está the most terrifying aspect. According to Peterson, the inevitability of breakdown doesn't guarantee positive outcomes. Breakdown é inevitable, mas transformation é not. Many narcissistas experience complete psychological collapse without developing any capacity para genuine change or improvement. They may recognize the truth about themselves, feel overwhelming guilt about their behavior, even develop genuine remorse para their actions, but lack the psychological infrastructure necessary to translate that recognition into sustained behavioral change. A breakdown without reconstruction. Você consegue imagine finally seeing yourself clearly after decades of self-deception. Só to realize que você lack the fundamental personality structure necessary to become a different person. Peterson describes this as one of the most tragic outcomes in psychology, complete self-awareness, combined with complete inability to change. Mas deixa-me tell você something que will completely change your perspective on narcissistic inevitability. According to Peterson's research, exists a crucial difference between narcissistas who experience inevitable breakdown and never recover, and those who somehow manage to use the breakdown as uma foundation para genuine personality reconstruction. The Difference lies in what Peterson calls psychological resilience. Capacity, the ability to maintain some sense of coherent identity while undergoing complete personality restructuring, é uma extraordinary rare psychological skill que requires enormous tolerância para uncertainty e discomfort. Peterson argues that this resilience capacity is not something that can be developed after breakdown occurs. It's either present beforehand as a dormant psychological resource or it's absent entirely. This means that the outcome of inevitable breakdown is largely predetermined by personality factors that existed long before the breakdown began. E então surge uma question que few have the courage to explore. If breakdown is inevitable, mas positive transformation is not guaranteed, what does this mean para the people who have been harmed by narcissistas? Peterson suggests that most victims will witness their abuser's breakdown but no necessarily see genuine improvement in their behavior. This creates uma cruel irony, the justice of seeing your abuser finally confront reality about themselves, combined with the frustration of realizing that this confrontation may not lead to the accountability or change que você hoped for. Breakdown without growth puede ser even more disturbing than continued unconsciousness. Mas here's something que will deixar você completely disturbed. Peterson revealed que some narcissistas, após experiencing inevitable breakdown and self-recognition, find ways to use their breakdown experience as uma new source of narcissistic supply. They become the broken narcissista who talks extensively about their psychological collapse, who shares insights about their own destructive patterns, who uses their apparent vulnerability or self-awareness as a way to gain sympathy and attention. A narcissism rebuilt around the narrative of having experienced profound breakdown. Peterson describes this as colapse narcisismo. Narcisismo que incorporates the language of psychological breakdown while maintaining the fundamental dynamic of requiring external validation para identity maintenance. And perhaps the most sophisticated form of narcissismo because it appears so genuine is self-aware. Leave your thoughts below. Is the inevitability of breakdown a source of hope or despair for those who have been hurt by narcissists? Peterson's answer is characteristically complex. The inevitability provides a kind of cosmic justice. No narcissista escapes the psychological consequences of their behavior indefinitely. But the unpredictability of timing e outcomes means que waiting para their breakdown and not uma practical strategy para healing or protection. Some narcissistas break down ways que lead to genuine remorse and behavioral change. Others break down in ways can make them even more manipulative and dangerous. Most break down in ways could change their internal experience but know their external behavior patterns significantly. Here's something que no one tells você about inevitable narcissistic breakdown. It often occurs when their victims least expected you need it. The breakdown may come decades after the primary harm was done, when victims have already done their healing work and moved on with their lives. Oh, it may never be visible to the people who were most affected by their destructive behavior. Peterson frequently works with families, helping them understand that their healing cannot depend on witnessing you benefiting from the narcissist's inevitable breakdown. The breakdown will happen, but its timing, nature, and outcomes are unpredictable and largely irrelevant to the recovery process of those who were harmed. Que você vai discover now will transform your understanding of psychological justice, a personal responsibility. Peterson revealed that the inevitability of narcissistic breakdown is not about punishment or moral correction, is simply uma natural consequence of living psychological contradiction para extended periods, just as physical laws eventually assert themselves regardless of our beliefs about them. Psychological laws also have inevitable consequences. You cannot indefinitely maintain uma identity based on fundamental lies about yourself without eventually facing psychological breakdown. And not justice, and just psychology. This means que finding peace with narcissistic abuse doesn't require waiting para their breakdown or hoping para their transformation. About understanding que they will face the psychological consequences of their choices regardless of your involvement or awareness. Their breakdown é inevitável, mas your healing é independent. Peterson também warns about something profound. Our contemporary society creates conditions that may delay narcissistic breakdown for longer periods, potentially making it even more severe when it finally occurs. Social media, political polarization, echo chambers, all provide external validation sources that can postpone the inevitable reckoning for years or decades. Here's the final truth that will reshape your understanding of human psychology. The inevitability of narcissistic breakdown and not something to wait for or hope for, something to understand as a natural psychological law que operates independently of our desires for justice and closure. The ultimate wisdom lies in building your life, your relationships, your sense of peace in ways that don't depend on witnessing their inevitable collapse. Because true liberation from narcissistic abuse comes not from waiting para their breakdown, mas from recognizing that your healing and growth are not connected to their psychological trajectory. Real psychological freedom emerges when you understand that their breakdown is their journey, not yours. Your journey is about building a life so fulfilling and ensuring that their inevitable psychological collapse, when it comes, is simply irrelevant to your continued well-being and happiness. Se você chegou até aqui, you're beginning to understand that psychological laws operate with the same inevitability as physical laws. But your healing doesn't need to wait para their consequences to manifest. No próximo vídeo, vamos explore something even more profound. How Jordan Peterson analyzes what happens quando narcissistas can't escape what they've done, and why that inescapability may be the ultimate teacher about human accountability. Subscribe and activate notifications, porque this journey está revealing timeless truths about psychology que will forever change how você understand justice, healing, and the natural consequences of our choices.